Oh my god, the controls. The controls. Oh my god, the controls. Oh, the controls. The controls are so awful.
Originally released early in 1990 with a guess in March or April based off of reviews from May. It may have been simultaneously released for both the Commodore 64 and Commodore Amiga, but the Commodore 64 is definitely the origined system that they designed it for. Today, in the first episode of Season 8, 7 Years of Obscurity, we are covering the not-so-obscure game, Turrican. It was developed by Factor 5 and published by Rainbow Arts in Europe. Over in America, Enterprise published it in the fall of 1990. I'm going to say September. It would receive ports to a variety of systems, including the Amiga, the Atari ST, the Amstrad CPC, the ZX Spectrum, the Genesis, the TurboGrafx, the Game Boy, and the CD, TV, and arguably the regular NES as Super Turrican, which is kind of a remake, but it definitely has a lot of this game in there as well. Today we are covering the Amiga version. This review was actually a request made by MsMadLemon quite a while ago when I did my Turrican 3 review. With that game, I felt like it was one of the best platformers I had ever played on the Amiga, which it's kind of funny because that one is not so well liked by the Amiga people, where they just absolutely fall head over heels for the first two games. And I alluded to my history with this game, which I had as a kid, and I really did not like it. But I said maybe, since I enjoyed the third game so much, perhaps the first one deserved another shot, and maybe I would see it a little differently. So she requested that I cover this one, and I finally got into it. We're going to start things off with a look at the box from the Enterprise American release. Joystick required. Legend tells of the evil three-headed Morgul and his power over the fears and nightmares of darkness itself. It also tells of his death, but nightmares have returned to Cloudman's existence, and once again fear reigns. Morgul is back. It is only you who can repel this darkness. It is only you who has the courage and the firepower to combat this evil. Your fear, gigantic. Your struggle, gigantic. Your power, gigantic. Up to three-way parallax scrolling. I don't see any parallax scrolling here, do you? So to understand some of my original thoughts on this game, it's marked by statements like that, up to three-way parallax scrolling, which is technically correct. There is up to three-way parallax scrolling in exactly 2 levels. The game starts in a desolate wasteland with a couple brown tones for mountains, a solid blue for the sky, with some green cactus as the only flavor of the background. It's marked by situations like this, in which I have fallen into a game over pit. So when people proclaim this as a definitive Amiga title, and they highlight the exploration elements as one reason for that, and I explore and I'm punished for it with a game over trap, when they highlight the graphics, but the first world is really showing its 8-bit origins, it caused me to wonder what they were thinking. However, this game did manage to endear itself to me, and it is the Amiga version. You can thank for that. But before we expand on my thoughts, let's take a look at what they were thinking at the time. Amiga World, February 1991. From Peter Ulfson of Vast, futuristic arcade adventure, Turrican has almost everything fans of the genre could want, and a few things they might not even expect. You pilot a silver-armored sprite killer through 5 worlds in search of the three-headed Morgul, whom the Dox identify as the source of all mankind's nightmares. Turrican is the Pentagon of platform games. The levels delightfully seem to go on forever, and they're not as omnidirectional as in some games. There are little side trips to make into battlefield filled caves, up stairways to the sky, dead ends that turn out not to be dead ends, and dead ends that do. There are hidden extra lives and boxes, invisible until shot, that hold huge supplies of potent weapons. I can't wait to go back and see what I missed. Said levels are rendered in an array of hard, handsome colors, but with subtlety. On the downside, the continue option is a real dog for a game this big. In Turrican, it seems to mean you restart from scratch, which you could have done anyway. Perhaps you have to complete a full world first. Yeah, perhaps you do. If so, that's tough. This one's not that easy. Nevertheless, pick this one up pronto. Turrican is one of the year's essential arcade games. $39, 95 cents, Enterprise 128, Cockeysville Road, Hunt Valley, Maryland. 210309, special requirements. God, you suck at your job. Are you really qualified to call this the Pentagon of platform games when you can't get off the first world? And you can't be all that good at platforming games in general, because I can't think of a single game at this time which wouldn't have had a continue system that put you back at the start of the world. And yet he still likes the game, which I guess is good. I mean, if I couldn't get past the first world of this game, well, I wouldn't even bother to review it, number one. But if I did, I'd hate it and I'd get eviscerated online because there's a lot of people that love this game. And even as a kid, I was, good enough at the game to make it to the fish boss in the second world. So I didn't like it as a kid, but I didn't completely suck at it either. Now, the game is hard. It was hard as a kid. It was hard coming back to it. As you are seeing now, I'm having quite a bit of difficulties. Even the smallest of enemies making contact with you for a mere second could be a death trap. Power-ups are absolutely essential to getting anywhere in this game, and the vast majority of them are invisible. But those are actually challenges I enjoy. Even back then, I understood. I had to find the invisible boxes to get stronger, and most of the ones you see me find in the first world are ones I had found back in the day. But in all honesty, while Turrican is not a perfect game, the real reason why I didn't used to like it, it's because I was unfortunate enough to have the Genesis version. Well, at first glance, they may appear graphically similar, but they're really not. Even in the first world here, you look to the mountains and you can see that the Genesis just gives up and starts putting blackness into the mountains. So even there, the graphics aren't quite the same. Platforms have been changed to actually be easier. It's a strange situation where they've made certain things easier and other things harder, like the cannons here aim directly at you. Bosses are generally harder. You seem to take more damage, while your lightning thing doesn't go as far across the screen, so you have to use your special weapons to defeat the bosses. But then the final boss is a million times easier in the Genesis. So they took a game which was already liked, and then they screwed with it. And they made it worse. And it's not just lesser than the Amiga. It's a bad game with some of the worst sound effects and music I have ever heard on the Genesis. And that's when you can even hear the music, because it's so low in volume. And it genuinely angers me, because the only reason I wanted this game on the Genesis was because I had seen it at the Amiga store. And, my dad just didn't want to play platforming games, so this is where I got it. And perhaps we should have read into the fact that it was in 1991 when it came out for the Genesis, was being sold for $12. So that's the reason why I didn't like Turrican in the past. Now, don't get me wrong. There are things that are bad about Turrican on the Amiga. Controls are one, but they are made forgivable, especially once you get out of this first world. I really don't understand why they started the game with this world. Beyond the 8-bit graphics here, it's really one of the more difficult worlds, so you should probably start your game with some of the easier, non-linear kind of levels. And really, this game gets credited for being a very non-linear platforming game, and after the first world, I don't think the game really qualifies as that. And the rest of the game is still hard, but it's a challenging, good hard. It's not a bad design hard like you see right here. Another game over moment that really had me angry. But everything shall become right with the world once we finally get out of this one. Hell, Hello, background graphics. Hello, nice 16-bit color palette. Hello, some of the most glorious music you're ever gonna hear on a 16-bit machine. Let's head over to Amiga Plus, October-November 1990. More than 50 new releases coming up. Aviators, quote, World of Turrican, unquote, Sword of Sodan 2. The World of Turrican presents you with 13 levels and over 13,000 screens of brilliant graphics and fast-paced fantasy action as you hunt down the evil wizard Morgul. Interesting to see mention of the unreleased Sword of Sodan 2. I wonder if it would have been like the Genesis version of Sword of Sodan, which was terrible. Of course, also interesting is that they called this game The World of Turrican, and it's not the only American magazine which called it that. I did my best to find any examples of that name being used officially, and the only thing I could find was the back of the European box, which has a literal map of the World of Turrican on it. So I think this is them just being idiots. Amazing Computing, December 1990. In some interesting news of the time, the 68040 has been delayed again by Motorola. It's not expected in quantity until Christmas. That means the 040 Amiga won't be out until then either. Could the AGA machines being called the Too Little Too Late chipset have more to do with Motorola? Well, perhaps not, because if we look further in the news, Commodore is working hard to push the Amiga, primarily because their other computer lines aren't doing particularly well anymore. They've allegedly shut down production of C128s due to lack of sales, while the sales of the C64 and the cult Commodore's low-cost PC clone are also down considerably, so more effort is being put behind the Amiga product line. When the computer is 5 years old and you're just now considering it your future, it's your fault. The review being presented in an awful multi-game format with The Plague, World of Turrican, and Globulus. World of Turrican is another new Enterprise release, and is both similar to and different from The Plague. The focus is still on action and quickly working into the goal, but this time your character is much smaller and movement in all 4 screen directions is required to make it through each level. It's the best example of its own particular subgenre of platform games for the Amiga. Both The Plague and Turrican have the usual power-up options along the way to increase your character's firepower, and the graphics are absolutely fabulous. The animation is extremely smooth and seamless, and disc accesses are very minimal. The audio soundtrack and sound effects fit right into both games, and either program could easily be used to show off what the Amiga is capable of doing. Turrican definitely shows off what the Commodore 64 is capable of doing, but on the Amiga, Shadow of the Beast had already come out a year prior to this. The game is good here, but it did not push the system, unless you're talking maybe about the music. And as my very favorite track in the gameplay, it's a very appropriate time to talk about the music. I love every track in this game other than the Alien Worlds track, because that one doesn't have music, it just has like this creepy sound effect kind of thing. Putting this review together, I've been humming tracks all week. Playing this again after having the Genesis version where the music is awful, and not even liking the gameplay in the Genesis. The music in the Amiga version is what helped push me onward in the first world, and then especially when I got to the second world and I saw the increase in the graphics and the music. Music can up the quality of a game, or lower the quality. It won't make a bad game great, but it can make a decent game very, very good, or turn it into bad. I definitely credit the music in helping turn my attitude around on this game, as well as this world. I think they should have started the whole game with the second world, because it looks so much better, it plays so much better. Even earlier when you heard me frustrated because I couldn't get above that one area because I had destroyed the blocks, and I was saying, you suck, I was saying that to myself because that felt like a fair challenge in contrast to the first world. Info, December 1990/January 1991, where I found an advertisement for the game, and it was just Turrican, it wasn't World of Turrican over here. Also marking with an asterisk that they have received Turrican, although they chose not to review it, as most American magazines just didn't care about platforming games. They would go on to mention the demo in the public domain, Turrican.lzh, saying the graphics were nicely crafted with fair to middling background music. The music is excellent, it's not just fair to middling. Now, when I reached this level for the first time, I think it's on Twitter, you can hear my reaction. I was like, what is this? Remember, I only got to the second world as a kid on the Genesis, and I never cared enough to watch anybody play through this far. I was genuinely surprised to see this turn into a shooter with parallax scrolling, although it's actually only two-way parallax scrolling, not three-way like it was claimed on the box. And I loved every second of it. The first time coming to the second world on the Amiga is what made me go, oh, this is better than I thought it was, but coming to this level is what made me go, this is good. I'm disappointed I didn't get to see more of it. I think every single world should have had at least one shooter level. What has so helped with my feelings on the first world and later on with the alien world, if those ones, which were 3 levels apiece, and they're the only worlds which have 3 levels, my feelings on those would have been so much better if the second level in those would have been shooters instead of just dragging on like they did. Plus, it would have been a million times more impressive to see some more varied parallax. The 2 shooter levels are so much fun. I think they make the platforming section of this world all the better. I think they could have made an entire game of Turrican with nothing but being a shooter. Fast forwarding to July of 1994, Amiga World gives some perspective on the first Turrican when they covered the third game. And a correction for my Turrican 3 review, where I made the assumption that it had probably never come out in America. It actually did, reviewed here by Peter Olsson, the same person who reviewed the first game for Amiga World. You may have noticed that I don't do many full reviews of arcade games. It's not that I don't like them, on the contrary, I love them. Do you really, though, Peter? But they tend to be of a type, and frankly, there's only so much one can write about a cartoon character blasting other cartoon characters as the game become, or hopping between platforms, before the reviews start to sound alike. Perhaps, if you could get past the first world, you'd find more to write about. You can go to shot97retro.blogspot.com to find my written review for this game. And in contrast to Peter, I think I'll find quite a bit to write about. Magic is hard to repeat, and sometimes age gets in the way anyway. Remember Turrican and Turrican 2? You could scarcely forget them. Around the turn of the decade, those 2 elemental games helped establish the Amiga as the platform for platformers. And he then goes on to needlessly bash the third game for ridiculous reasons, because it's not fresh enough for this 9-year-old computer. While I appreciate the first game a lot more than I used to, I still think the third game is better. Now, if it had more levels like this, I'd absolutely love it. It looks great, it sounds fantastic, and it's a delightful challenge. It's almost a bullet hell in the platforming level. There's so much going on. I like the placements in general of the platforms. Even there, it's only, it's up right above my head, but it's only one of them. The enemies were well placed to have some fun here with some invincibility as I steamroll straight through them. And as it runs out, here I jump from one side to the other. I use a special attack, and while I'm almost dead, use my laser to just survive that one. That's the most memorable moment of the game right there for me, and it comes from having been challenged. Now, this is a harder level than anything from the first world, but it's done in all of the right ways, so it's less frustrating. Time for some European perspectives. Computer and video games, May 1990. Covering the original Commodore 64 version, and here's us thinking that nightmares are caused by eating cheese after 9 p.m. The real blame lies in the 3 heads of the Morgul, who dwells far away in his dark kingdom and grows stronger all the time by feeding on the fear which his presence instills in people. Naturally, these folks are more than a little weary of going off to do battle with Morgul, so they build a robot devoid of any notion of fear to do the job for them. That robot is called Turrican, and it's you who controls him throughout the game. Almost all of that ridiculous story was the magazine. That is not in the manual. Talk about needing to fulfill a word count. It's rare these days to see an original Commodore 64 game, let alone a good one, and Turrican is most definitely both of these. It's an enormous game with a simply vast map that contains all the ingredients of a hit. Acres of playing area, untold amounts of creatures, items to collect, the list is almost limitless. Graphically, it's superb. This is a very difficult arcade adventure, and you need every life you can get your mitts on. There are some games that sneak up on you, make you go weak at the knees, and won't let up until you've completed it. Turrican is one of them. Remarkable. Paul Rand. Graphics 93%, sound 90%, value 93%, playability 95%, overall 93%. Here, the magazine claims that the Amiga version is due in a couple of months, but I have another magazine which reviewed both the Amiga and Commodore 64 versions, and they did that in May, like this magazine did, so that's why I'm saying it could have been simultaneous. Although Computer and Video Games wouldn't review the Amiga version until August of 1990. Get this. A demon with 3 heads is giving everybody bad dreams, so you have to get down to his place and use a vast array of laser armament to persuade him to take the next bus out of town. Alas, being a security-conscious sort of demon, he surrounded his gaff with all sorts of monstrous guardians and spiky platforms. The massive amount of firepower at your disposal makes this a terrifically satisfying blast, and what makes the game even better, the game's great graphics and music. The sample pack title track is particularly impressive. Like I said, get this. 8 shrieks of blasting mayhem from the makers of Daenerys. 94%. £24, 99 pence. I think the liberties these guys took in expanding the story, both when they reviewed it for the Commodore 64 and later for the Amiga, makes this the perfect opportunity for us to look at the game's manual. The definitive science fiction shoot-'em-up. There's 2 levels that are shooters. A story of times long gone by tells us of the 3-headed Morgul who lives a scheduled life in his kingdom. This Morgul is the cause of all the fears and nightmares of mankind. It is furthermore said that in ancient times he was banished to an unknown dimension by the hero Devilon. Fear and sleepless nights disappeared out of the people's lives. For some time now, people have again been tormented by nightmares and suffer from a serious state of dread and fear. Hardly anybody dares to set a foot onto the streets at night, and a dreadful fear that a Morgul has returned to his kingdom is alive in the people's minds again. As the only man on earth whose courage has not yet deserted him, you are sent off once again to free humankind from its burden of fear. You have been armed with the latest weapons and technical equipment for this mission. Find Morgul in his kingdom and destroy him for once and for all. It's even better at the end. Light will now return, and everywhere life will come back over the shadows of the past. Some of us fall, but if we don't stop the darkness together this time, there will be no hope. Evil never wins if we believe in us. But now the warrior needs to rest. Don't forget to press the almighty button on your fun stick. So laughable would be the endearing way to describe this story. It's bad. So obviously with Factor 5, English is not their first language. They're German, and even Enterprise in America didn't lift a finger in an attempt to have that story make sense. That's the exact same manual the Europeans got. With the Genesis, they removed the text at the end. They're like, there's no way we could have this make any sense. Just get rid of it. Although I wouldn't have done that, unless a game is going to put cutscenes inside of it to integrate a story inside of the game. Well, even the best writers aren't going to know what to do with a platformer. And if they take it seriously and they write like 10 pages for a game which has no story other than a little blip at the end, I'd make fun of them even more. Then what they have is better than nothing. It is laughable, but it's kind of endearing because of how bad it is. One last thing from Computer and Video Games, September 1990, where we have a chart on all formats. I think this is based on sales, but they don't make that clear. At number 14 is Turrican. Coming in as number 3 in the Amiga Top 20, and number 14 in the Commodore 64 Top 20. See you Amiga, June 1990. Programmed by the same team who brought you Daenerys, Turrican looks to be a turning point in European software, featuring lots of extra weapons, neat sprites, and hidden bonuses. It's very reminiscent of the Japanese shoot-'em-ups, which have clogged up arcades and kiddies consoles for the past 6 years. The standard nasties aren't too inspired, however the end-of-level beasts are quite smart. The graphics are, to coin a term, arcade quality. All the aliens are well-drawn and well-animated, again similar to the Japanese style of clear-cut, high-tech design. The sound effects are of a similar high standard, a multitude of zaps, explosions, and over 20 different tunes. Turrican is the best shoot-'em-up I've seen this year. Definitely a game that the discerning arcadester cannot afford to ignore. Mark Patterson, 91%. Okay, just because the guy has a gun doesn't make the game a shoot-'em-up. It's a side-scrolling platformer. 2 levels are shoot-'em-ups. They mention the bosses, calling them quite smart, and no, not really. Their patterns are extraordinarily basic. They move from left to right, up to down. And there's nowhere that's really safe for you either. Their movements and their bullets, will inevitably cross your path. So it becomes about, are you powered up or are you not? Should you be powered up, you can use your lightning in combination with your special attacks to get rid of any boss relatively easily, probably right before they kill you. Should they do that, well, it actually takes several deaths for your power-ups to completely reset themselves, so chances are you're going to kill the boss on your next life. And should you not have any power-ups or they kill you enough to reset them, well, they will become quite difficult. Although, thankfully, because you can die so many times and your special attacks reset themselves, eventually, it'll take quite a while, but you can usually get past a boss that way. They do look good, and I'm glad that they're there, but they're not particularly challenging. Found another chart for you from CU Amiga, September 1990. I think this is a staff chart, but again, they're not making that clear. Turrican coming up number 2 for this month and number 7 last month. The Games Machine, May of 1990, where all of the first page and some of the second page is dedicated to their own made-up story. When civilization was still in its infancy, man already lived in fear. The cause of their fright was a three-headed beast called Morgul, a creature of fantastic but evil magical power. Yet man of old never even saw Morgul. It lived a solitary existence. You mean a scheduled existence? Its disgusting thoughts from its foul mind leaked out. The filth seeped into humans' minds, developing unease and breeding fears.
Power-ups would be nice.
They imagined things, saw things out of the corner of their eye, heard heavy footsteps. People would endure sleepless and go to extremes to avoid slumber. Okay, Factor 5 is German. What's your excuse for the bad English? Rainbow Arts really know how to produce top-notch arcade games. It's little surprise that this is another highly professional and playable game. Turrican is tough. 13,000 screens, 13 levels, 5 completely different worlds, and many diverse Morgul minions mean end-of-level guardians. The game offers shoot-'em-up action in a platform game mold, one which requires some very deft maneuvers, mixed with excellent graphics and wide weaponry selection. Turrican is a 90s arcade game not to be missed, although not a particularly impressive Amiga game. It is the best pure arcade blast release for the 16-bit Commodore so far this year. Warren Lapworth. 94% for the Commodore 64, 92% for the Amiga, and this is the magazine which made me say that they might have been released simultaneously. Now, taking aside the writer who clearly wants to write awful novels instead of review video games, his thoughts on the actual game are probably the ones which most closely match with my own. It's good, but there are flaws, and nobody else had anything bad to say about the game. So in an effort to keep your eyes safe from the awful 8-bit graphics of this alien world on the Amiga, I'm going to show you some actual 8-bit footage. The Commodore 64 marking its debut on my channel. I'm not sure why I haven't shown it before, but I sure as heck wasn't going to let the Sega Genesis have the only say on the different versions. It's the original on a technical standpoint. It's extraordinarily impressive, although still it is not a perfect game. Plays a little differently than the Amiga, a little harder, although a good hard, unlike the Genesis, which was a bad hard. Certainly worth playing. If you like the Amiga version, you should definitely play the Commodore 64 and vice versa. The 64 even has 3-way parallax scrolling on the side there for that shooter level. Handing it to the Amiga on parallax. Although this alien world here, as if I could hate it even more, definitely not a fan on the 64. It'd all be one thing if it was just the first world, which kind of dragged on. This world is a nightmare of bland graphics, no music, which was the highlight of the rest of the game, nothing but creepy sound effects in the background. It's a long, boring maze full of death pits, and just why did they pick the 2 worst-looking worlds to put the most levels in? I can't understand it. And then they follow that up with this, the final world, and perhaps the best-looking one. So don't give me any of that, we're nearing the end. The bad guy's creepy lair, it's got to look a certain way. Here, we're at the end, and it looks beautiful. Even the sky, which again, it's a solid blue like in the first world, but around it we have background effects, the chains and stuff. So even without the parallax here, it still looks good. This is how the first world should have looked, and this one is severely underutilized because it's really only the one level. The second level is just you making your way towards the final boss without any enemies crossing your path. So you had all these assets, but you only used them for this one level. The Australian Commodore and Amiga review, December 1990. Review by Kendall Lister. Welcome to Turrican. Boomed voice, followed by a pretty picture and some of the best music I have heard in a game for a long time. Turrican is very quick between levels, and most of the levels don't even require disk access. Overall, the graphics are top-notch, the sound and music excellent, and the gameplay addictive. This is well worth your hard-earned cash. Graphics 89%, sound 93%, gameplay 91%, value 86%, overall 90%. And coming in at 60 Australian dollars, you'll be needing that hard-earned cash. I did confer with the wonderful Missy L, who is Australian, and it was decided that, well, it's crazy to think about what these games would be going for today in terms of inflation. You know, they'd be going for over $100. That at 60 Australian dollars, when you factor in the exchange rates, Australia wasn't paying any more than the rest of the world was at the time. Per usual, I would like to get in some information on PAL and NTSC issues. Factor 5 being a German company, this was developed in a PAL territory. However, they're not using PAL resolution. I believe they're actually using NTSC overscan, which is a wonderful compromise that I wish people making new games for the Amiga today would consider. You get almost the full PAL resolution, but it's completely NTSC compatible. On a PAL Amiga, it displays in 4:3. On an NTSC machine, it's a little more squished into an actual square. I actually stretched my screen so it would be in 4:3. So I am displaying it correctly. If it was an actual PAL game, it would either crash on an NTSC machine or it would crop out a section of the display. It is running faster here in NTSC mode, which I like. Not that it runs badly in PAL, but I prefer it running faster. We got one more review to show off to you. May of 1993, Amiga Computing. Another couple of golden oldies to bring a lump to your throats. There are any number of platformers knocking around, as we all know, and although fewer in number, shoot-em-ups aren't exactly a rarity either. One game that manages to combine the best elements of both is Turrican, an eons-old affair from the Where Are They Now German company, Rainbow Arts. There's some story about evil warlocks, terrible nightmares, and a general threat to mankind, but it all pales into insignificance when the action begins and you proceed to make your way through the 13 levels of violentastic platformery. Scrolling throughout is top-notch, and considering it's nearing the ripe old age of 4, Turrican's animation of the levels and sprites is not to be sniffed at. A different tune accompanies each level, and again, they're not half bad. There is barely a break in the action all the way through, add-in power-ups aplenty, and the odd secret level, there were no secret level. And what you have is a truly fun and addictive game that shows only the slightest signs of its pensionable age. So in terms of the magazines from back in the day, both in America as well as in Europe, overwhelmingly, they loved it. There's only one magazine I could find which said it was good, but not great. And especially considering the Amiga in 1990. I really think there are a couple worlds here which showed age right from the beginning. And while I'm not going to dive into the controls, because good gamers get good, you know, you've certainly heard in the background me discussing live those controls, haven't you? That being said, Turrican is quite a memorable game, even for me. That first world, while I might not be that impressed with it in terms of what the Amiga can do, it is ingrained into my mind for all eternity. Cursed with the Genesis version, I grew up hating this, but I've changed my mind. The Amiga version is a good game, as it is on the Commodore 64 as well. Seeing those bright, vibrant colors from the second world onward, it can be graphically impressive, and I was truly wowed once I saw the shoot-em-up levels. The blending of the platforming and shooter elements makes this a game which is absolutely worth playing. while it can be hard for the wrong reasons, overall it presents a worthy challenge for the adults playing a platforming game today. And the music just gives it that extra shine. I wish I would have had this one back in the day. I hope you all enjoyed this review. I know it's a more nuanced opinion than what a lot of others would have to say, but it's how I feel. Thanks to MsMadLemon for the request. Hope it was worth the wait. You might enjoy her music-related video on Turrican, or perhaps my Turrican 3 review. You might also like my review for Sword of Soda, and how about Castlevania for some 8-bit fun. Written reviews at shot97retro.blogspot.com. Hope to see you all later. Goodbye.